Okay, well, welcome and thank you for joining us today. I'm Linda Tovash, Senior Advisor for Education here at the Korea Society. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the work we do, we're a non-governmental, non-profit organization dedicated to the promotion of greater appreciation, understanding, and cooperation between the people of the U.S. and Korea. And we are not only happy, but we're honored to have with us today Dr. Peterson, Professor Emeritus at Brigham Young University. Dr. Peterson holds a PhD from Harvard, and he lived in Korea for 15 years, 7 of which he served as director of the Korean Fulbright Scholarship Program, or Scholars Program, I should say. Since his retirement from Brigham Young, where he worked for 34 years, he has created a research institute called Chungwae Jiwa, and it's based on the Korean expression meaning a frog that got out of the well. And I think we're going to hear about that today. The Institute's purpose and its associated YouTube channel is to help Koreans get a global view of their proud 5,000-year history. You know, I could spend a good part of this event just talking about Dr. Peterson's considerable accomplishments and contributions, but let me just briefly state that he is an esteemed leader in Korean studies, who is a researcher, who's authored numerous books, as well as numerous academic articles for journals, and these are across a range of topics. He is a documentarian, who co-produced the documentary Unfortunate Brothers, which is about the division of Korea. And he's currently working on a documentary on the Utah National Guard Division of Korea, the Artillery Unit 213, and that fought several major battles during the war and miraculously did not lose one man. So we're looking forward to seeing that come out. In addition, Dr. Peterson is a poet, and he's a tireless promoter of teaching Shijo in U.S. school curriculums, and even, I think, international curriculums. And I would say, perhaps most importantly of all, he's a teacher. And so we're happy to have Dr. Peterson explore with us the concepts in his most recent book, The Frog Outside the Well Looks at Korean History, in which he presents his views on how Korean history has become distorted and identifies the factors that led to that distortion. Before I turn the program over to Dr. Peterson, I just want you to know at the end we will have time for questions. And for those of you who are joining us virtually, just you feel free at any time during this program to submit your questions. Just email them to Korean Studies, one word, at koreasociety.org. And we'll do our best to address as many questions as possible. And now, Dr. Peterson.
In good Korean fashion, I should make a bow like this at the beginning. That's what you do all the time. Well, today is my lucky day. How many of you play Wordle? Any Wordle fans here? Today, I got Wordle in one clue. It's never happened before. I got the right word. So it's, I posted it on my Facebook page, and one of my friends said, you need to go buy a lottery ticket. So today's my lucky day. I'm really honored to be here. I've done a lot of things with the Korea Society over the years, and during the COVID, we pretty much locked down, and so this is my first time to be back again after that time, so I'm really happy to be here. I like the Korea Society, I like what they do, and they do some of the things that I do, so that's harmonious, and I'm happy about that. Today, I'm going to talk about my latest book and some of the things I'm trying to argue there. And to start it off, you see the frog over the side. I've got a YouTube channel. I meant to put up a page of it here so you could see it, but I don't know if you've seen my YouTube channel. It's called The Frog Outside the Well. I don't know if you've seen it, but I went out to buy a drink and a little treat just now before the thing started, and went down to 42nd Street, and one of these street vendor guys, I just wondered if he was Korean. I said, "한국 사람이에요?" He said, "Yeah." "How are you doing, Professor?" I said, "What?" And he's seen my YouTube channel, the guy on the corner. So I'm having a lot of fun with the YouTube channel. And what I'm trying to do with it is to convey some ideas that I think are important about Korea and about Korean history and about Korea's perception of itself. Because I think the Korean perception of itself has been distorted by the events of the 20th century. And I'd like to try to redirect that and say I'm Don Quixote trying to, change Korean history, but I really am. That's what I want to do. And I'm finding YouTube a very effective way of doing that, more effective than publishing books. But here I went and published a book about this, so I like to do books, both. But my latest book went into a fourth printing within 2 weeks, and then it slowed down a bit. But still, 4,000 copies is nice. Other books I've done, most books that academics do run 1,000 copies, and that's it. On a YouTube presentation, if I get 1,000 views, I consider it a failure. That's my poorest presentation. If I get 600,000 views, that's the best I've done. So I find it a very interesting way of getting my message out. And today I want to tell you about my message. So that's The Frog Outside the Well and the book that I wrote. And I'm going to give a review of my own book today. We were talking about what to do, and I said, I'd like to talk about my book. So we're going to talk about my book. Oh, there's my YouTube page, The Frog Outside the Well. And the book has 3 sections in it, 3 major things that I do in the YouTube channel and 3 major things that I'm working on, that I'm trying to do. The 3 sections are, first, peaceful Korean history. Now, that might jangle your nerves if you're a Korean historian, because the story of Korean history is not peaceful, according to most historians. I'm giving you a different point of view on this one. By saying 2 Confucianisms, I am interested in the survival of Confucianism. Confucianism is under attack in Korea today. A lot of people don't like Confucianism, especially women, especially young women, because of the oppression of women that's been associated with Confucianism. But I argue there are 2 Confucianisms. One is historic and one is less historic. One is old history, one is recent history. And I argue that they're 2 different things. And the one history, the one Confucianism, is not oppressive of women. And that's the kind of history, kind of Confucianism that could work in Korea today. And then the third thing I want to talk about is Shijo. I work on Shijo, and I'll tell you why and what I'm trying to do with this as we go along. I see these as a template for reevaluating Korean history. That sounds grandiose as can be, but that's what I want to do. And I see a roadmap for saving Confucianism. That really sounds grandiose, doesn't it? Well, call me Don Quixote, that's the way it is. And then a call to include Shijo in the curriculum across America. And that sounds grandiose. And so this is really far beyond what a person would ordinarily try to do. But this is what I want to do, and that's what I want to talk about today. Part 1 of the book calls for a re-examination of Korean history. You all know that Korean history is marked with turmoil, lots and lots of invasions, war, and chaos. That's the history of Korea in a nutshell. I'm going to offer you a different point of view. At least the glass is half full, and I'm going to suggest that the glass is half empty, or vice versa. The point is, perspective is different here. And I'm going to argue that there's a word for the hammer syndrome. The hammer syndrome is if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's the only tool you've got. If a hammer is the only tool in your toolbox, everything looks like a nail. If you look at Korean history as if it's nothing but turmoil, that's all you're going to see. But if you look at Korean history from another point of view of, wow, look at all these peaceful things, you will come away with a different point of view. And that's what I'm going to try to do today with you and in part one of this presentation. I see a top 10 list, top 10 separate evidences, any one of which is a strong argument for a peaceful history of Korea. And I'm arguing that all 10 of these add up to a radically different point of view of Korean history than most of you have been taught if you're from Korea. And I'm going to go over these rather quickly because each one of them is an hour lecture, if I wanted to. And I've done an hour lecture on each one of these. And I've got about a 10, 15-minute video on each one of these. So if you want to go into more detail on what I'm thinking about any of these, or if you disagree with any one of these along the way, there's more detail on my YouTube channel. The first one, the longest dynasties. The longest meaning the longest dynasties in the world. Korea has a 1,000-year dynasty in Shilla, a 500-year dynasty in Koryo, and a 500-year dynasty in Chosun. Other countries in the world seldom get close to 300-400 years. And one other interesting thing about the long dynasties of Korea is Korea has had no failed dynasties. By a failed dynasty, I mean a dynasty that cranked up, unified the country, and did its thing for the lifespan of its founder, but toppled when the founder died. The Qin dynasty of China, Qin Shi Huangdi set up unified China, but the dynasty fell when he died. The Sui dynasty of China lasted 37 years and died when the founder died. Korea has no failed dynasties. If they set up a dynasty, it lasts for 500 years. Even the Kaya kingdom, which we always think of the baby of the dynasties, you know. When we talk about the three kingdoms, I like to say, how many kingdoms were there at the time of the three kingdoms? And that's a silly question. You know, who's buried in Grant's tomb? How many kingdoms were there in the three kingdoms period? Well, there were 4, because we tend to overlook the Kaya kingdom. We think about it as the baby, short-lived dynasty. It lasted 520 years. Now, it started in a mythological phase, and we don't know for sure when it began, but those are the dates we're working with. So whether that's accurate or not, it's close enough for our purposes today. Now, the dynasties are the longest dynasties in the world. Someone pointed out there's a dynasty in the middle of India that lasted 1,000 years. Maybe if you scratch and look, the Ottoman Empire lasted 600 years. But Korea has 3 long dynasties in succession. So that's point number 1, long dynasties. Number 2, peaceful transition from dynasty to dynasty. Now, the narrative that you're given in the Korean classroom is that it was turmoil, chaos, and revolution between dynasties. Well, if that's your hammer, that's all you're going to see. But if you stop and look at it in a more objective fashion, let's go back and look at the Kaya kingdom again. The Kaya kingdom was absorbed, not conquered by Shilla. The evidence for this is the final king of Kaya became a Chingol, that is to say, a member of the aristocratic class of Shilla. And further evidence of this is the great unification general of Shilla was Kim Yushin. Kim Yushin was a Kaya man. He was the grandson of the last Kaya founder. And Kim Yushin is this great Hwarang knight who worked with Kim Chun-chu, the crown prince, as a Hwarang knight. And they have this great story of this knighthood and working to conquer the other 2 kingdoms and unify Shilla. But there's more to it than that. Kim Yushin's older sister also married Kim Chun-chu. And she was also a Chingol of the true bone class. And they had a baby, Kim Chun-chu and Yi Sun-shin's sister. And this baby girl, who did she marry? She married her uncle, Kim Yushin. And when I tell this to Korean audiences, the young women kind of shudder, you know, oh, Jingaropta, you know, marrying your uncle. But in early modern times, a lot of kingdoms had close marriages between third degree and fourth degree degrees of relationship. So Kaya was absorbed by Shila. So that's a smooth transition. And then you go from Shila to Koryo, and Hu Goguryo was an enemy of Hu Pekje, but Hu Goguryo was a protector of Shila. And when Hu Pekje was defeated, Hu Goguryo quietly absorbed Shila. So there's another smooth transition. And then when Koryo fell, the founder of the Chosun dynasty was who? Isungye. And Isungye marched off to fight the Ming dynasty and said, hey, that's no good. And then Wiwado, at Wiwado Island in the middle of the Yalu River, he turned around and came back and conquered Kaesong. Now, when a dynasty falls, there are several ways of measuring the chaoticness of the fall. You can look at how many people died. You can look at how long it took. And when Isungye took over the dynasty in Kaesong, it didn't take him years. Other dynasties take years, take decades of chaos before they get founded. He basically took over in one afternoon. That's a pretty good measure of quiet and stable, peaceful transition. And yet that's not what you hear in the Korean narrative, because the Korean narrative was largely couched in the Japanese era, where the Japanese were making fun of the Koreans, saying, we Japanese are dynamic, and we have revolutions and set up new dynasties every 100 or 200 years. You Koreans are stagnant and don't do anything right. That's the Japanese point of view. And the Koreans would respond, oh, no, we have the revolution. Why, look, there's a revolution there. Well, there was no revolution there. And you don't have to say there was a revolution there to keep up with the Japanese. It's better to say, no, there was no revolution. We're not into that. That's not our thing. That's not what we do. So smooth transitions from dynasty to dynasty is my second point. Third point, you're not going to like this. This is heartburn for y'all. The few invasions. The narrative in Korea is there have been so many invasions in Korea. One count has 948 or some other absolute, accurate, ridiculous number. The point of that is, if you have that many invasions, you're counting every pirate raid along the coast. And if Japanese pirates come in and steal a bag of rice and a pig, kidnap a pretty girl, maybe kill a few villagers, that's not an invasion. That's a pirate raid. And to get 900 invasions, you've got to count every pirate raid you can find. I met a guy that did this. He went through all of the old books he could find, tabulating every single invasion he could find. And I was impressed at the time, but later I started thinking, what in the world is he thinking? What kind of mental attitude is this? You know, this victimization idea that we are so victimized, we've been invaded so many times. And I'm suggesting to the Korean audiences that the opposite point of view is better, that we have not been invaded all that many times. Well, how many times have we been invaded? Well, you've got the Japanese invasion, and that was horrendous. The Japanese invasion of 1592 was absolutely horrendous. It was one of the largest battles in world history at that point, meaning numbers of people killed. So I'm not denigrating invasions at all. I'm saying that there were major invasions. The Imjin was one. The Mongol invasion was also horrific. And I see these two major invasions as the two major invasions. Well, the Korean audience will very quickly say, oh, no, what about Pyeongjahoran? What about Cheongmyohoran? The Manchu invasions. Those were very, very different. They invaded in 1627, the Cheongmyohoran, and they got the king to agree to recognize the Qing dynasty. Whereabout they retired. The Manchus left. They didn't go through the countryside marauding the way the Japanese did, the way the Mongols did. One general got out of line and went into one village and did some marauding. And he was fired and sent back home. And the emperor, the Qing emperor, said, that's not our game. We want Korea to be our ally. It was an attempt to make a friend, not to make an enemy. Well, the Korean king, Injo, went backdoor to the Ming Dynasty and said, let's attack together. This is the famous Bukbol plan. And it never happened because both Korea and the Ming Dynasty were beaten up by the Japanese and didn't have their armies in full strength and ready to go. And they kept postponing this Bukbol to attack Manchu until the Manchus heard about it in 1636. And they turned around and attacked again. And this time they said, "Oh, king, you didn't keep your promise. You promised to be our ally. And this time, to make sure you keep your promise, we're taking your 3 sons as hostages." And they did. And they took the hostages. And then they released the hostages once they had conquered the Ming Dynasty. So that was a very different kind of invasion. If you're going to insist we need more invasions, okay, you can have that one. But it was not on the same scale, not the same kind of invasion as the Hideyoshi invasion of 1592, okay? So I'm suggesting a different perspective at the look of invasions, okay? And I'm going to say few invasions, not so many invasions. And I'm going to say, let's get rid of this victimization attitude within our Korean history, okay? The fourth point is no argument. Everyone agrees Korea has never invaded another country. Well, almost everyone. There's some people that scratch and try to find, well, there was this or that. But I had a dinner, it was a lunch actually, with the Gukjang, Director General level at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs one day. And I just happened to mention this in the conversation. And he was visibly deflated. He lowered his shoulders and he bowed his head. "We were so weak, we never invaded another country." Isn't that silly? This is something that Korea should be proud of, especially in the 21st century. You know, that we are not a nation that invades other countries. We are a peaceful nation. That's my argument. Number 5, thanks to David Kong at USC, who talks about this, the border between Korea and the Manchus, the Jurchens, the Khitans that changed all the time, and finally the Chinese. That border is the Amnok River, the Yalu River. And the Amnok River is a border that has not changed for 1,000 years. That's the longest unchanged border on the planet, as near as I can tell. Find me one that's lasted longer. The border between Portugal and Spain has lasted a long time, 800 years. But the other borders, except for England and Japan that have waters as borders, but a land border, this is the longest one on the surface of the planet, as far as I can tell. The Pearl River Vietnam border is 900 years, so almost as long, okay? So that says something of stability, does it not? That Korea has had a safe territory for all this time. Now, there were some border skirmishes, but nothing really changed that border. Number 6, graves of kings not robbed. With the Korea Society, have taken several groups to Korea to improve textbooks. And one group of textbook writers and editors, publishers, we were in Gyeongju, and we were standing in front of Orung, the 5 tombs, the oldest 5 tombs in Korea, in Shilla. And one of the tombs was the tomb of Park Hyakose, we assume. So I was telling about Park Hyakose, and there's a group of about 15 writers and editors. And as I was winding up what I was talking about, one of the scholars raised his hand. He was an archaeologist. And he said, "When were these tombs robbed?" And I said, "Well, the tombs haven't been robbed." And he said, "Well, of course they have. That's what you do." He says, "I'm an archaeologist of the Middle East and of Egypt, and you cannot find a tomb that has not been robbed. So of course these tombs have been robbed." And and he's doing archaeology doctrinaire, teaching the non-archaeologist the way it goes. Tombs are robbed. That's the way it is. And I said, no. When the archaeologists have excavated the 7, 8 tombs that they've done, they found the gold crown and the jewels. Everything's there. The tomb has not been robbed. And he said, "Well, wow. And then he pointed to me, and I'd already talked about the peaceful tradition of Korea to this group. And he said, well, that reinforces your theory. Korea was never chaotic enough to rob the tombs. And I think there's real substance to there, because everybody knows there's gold in them tombs. And in cases of chaos and poverty and desperation, a little bit of gold would sure help out. But the tombs were never robbed. Number 7, Sunbi culture, and I put as opposed to samurai culture. Sunbi culture is really a marvelous thing in Korea. For 1,000 years, Korea has had the Sunbi at the center of their civilization. The Sunbi, of course, is the scholar who studies and studies and studies to pass an exam that he might be selected to serve in the government, which was the highest form of social prestige in the society. For 1,000 years, from 100 years into Koryo, the scholar, the Sunbi, has been the primary ideal model in Korean culture. Not the samurai, not the sword-wielding military man, but the Sunbi. Number 8 is civilian control of the court, and by this I'm talking about the centralized government. Again, the Japanese have either purposely or incidentally distorted the Korean history by pointing out that, by saying that Korea is behind the times. The Japanese overlords would say, you Chosenjin are less developed than Uri Nihonjin because you don't have a feudal system. We Japanese and the Europeans are all advanced because we've had a feudal system. That's brought the power to the front, and we can do things. And Japan, we are much stronger than you, Korea. So see, feudalism is a much better thing. Korea left feudalism behind 1,000 years ago. Late Shilla, early Koryo was feudalistic, but they quickly adopted a centralized state. And in the centralized state, how do you choose people to serve? By taking the exam. You pick the Sunbi. So these two are linked together as indicators of a peaceful form of government, not government by the sword. And in fact, have any of you heard the expression, the pen is mightier than the sword? Well, in Korea they say the boot, the brush, is more powerful than the sword. And in this case, this is a good example of this. And when the traditional government falls apart, what do traditional people do? Well, the Japanese relied on the samurai. There was a case of the 47 samurai who killed themselves ritually because they'd lost their master and they didn't know what to do in the world. There are other samurai in Japan who looked for a position of power, a place to be a samurai, and they led Japan into conquering China, or defeating China enough to take over Taiwan, taking over Korea after defeating Russia, then moving into Manchuria in 1931, moving into mainland China in 1937. It's samurai. The samurai were in control. The samurai were saying, well, this is what samurai do. What were the Koreans doing? Well, the Koreans, when the traditional world falls apart, they fell back on doing what they do. They studied. They studied. And it seems like that's the weaker thing to do compared to the samurai. But look how Korea is now. They've caught up, officially, they've caught up to Japan this year in per capita income. And they're moving ahead. Do you know anyone that has a Sony telephone? Do you know anyone that has an LG or Samsung telephone? So Korea is making its mark in the world, and it's because of the boot, the brush, the Sunbi tradition. These first 8 are all things that Korea can be proud of. Number 9 is not a thing to crow about. Nobody's happy about slavery, but many pre-modern societies, many even recently modern societies like the United States, have had a tradition of slavery. Korea has the longest unbroken chain of slavery in the world, which is to say, the slaves that were created by the warfare of the Three Kingdoms Wars. And it's important to note that slavery at its root is usually prisoners of war. This is true for American slaves as well. The American slaves initially were not British traders running through the jungle, grabbing a guy by the ankle and throwing him on the boat. The British traders came to the African king and said, if you got some slaves, you have some prisoners in recent warfare that you'd like to sell. And that becomes the commercialization of slavery, but it has its roots in warfare. And then the victorious king went out and looked for more people to trade because then there was money in the game. And in Korea, too, the warfare of the Three Kingdoms led to the initiation of slavery. And then once that started in the Three Kingdoms period, the unified Shilla period, nothing happened to liberate the slaves. The aristocratic class really did not change, and the lower class did not change. Even during the chaos of the Japanese invasion, the slaves returned to their position after the war was over. So slavery is not a thing to be proud of, but it is an indicator of the peaceful tradition of Korean history. Number 10, I think, I put it in red. I was going to start with this, but I'll finish with it on this slide. You know Kim, Yi, and Pak? Most common names in Korea, right? Kim is 21% of the population. Yi is 15%. Pak is 9%. Put them all together, that's 45% of the population with 3 surnames. Why? Why? I've been looking for the answer for this, and 4 years ago, I think I found it. After 54 years of Korean studies, I've been involved in Korea for 58 years. 54 years of Korean studies, I think I've got the answer. And the answer is all of this. That Korea has had such peaceful tradition that the royalty of bygone dynasties are the Kims, the Is, and the Paks. This came to me when I was meeting a group of new students at BYU, and there was a young female student from Japan, and I shook her hand and said, "Iraishaimase," or something, and I asked her what her name was, and she said, "Fujiwara." I said, "Fujiwara? That's the aristocracy of the Heian period." And she, in a very East Asian, feminine humility, "Oh, yes, thank you for recognizing my family." And then she said the most important thing: they killed most of us. There are very few of us left. And it occurred to me that's what happens in every other country in the world. It did not happen in Korea. They did not kill the Kims of Kaya. They did not kill the Kims of Shilla. They did not kill the Paks of Shilla. They did not kill the Is of the Chosun dynasty. Those 3 names are symbols of this peaceful history and stable history of Korea. It's my hope that in years to come, when a foreigner says to a Korean friend, "Oh my goodness, there are so many Kims in Korea, how come?" Now, most people can't answer that question, but I would hope they would say, "Oh, that's a symbol of our peaceful tradition. Those are aristocratic names. We never killed our aristocrats." That's my point of view. Okay, so there's a summary of those things. The longest dynasties in world history, the peaceful transitions from dynasty to dynasty means we have about a 1,500-year period of the ruling class staying in position. Invasions, I argue only 2 major invasions. Never invaded another country. That's truly an example of a peaceful country, is it not? The longest border, unchanged border on the planet, the symbol of, what in the world did I write there? Of managing social order, I guess that's what that says. The Sunbi, the educated elite, the system of education. You look at education in Korea today, and a lot of people talk about the education fervor of the 20th century, the wanting to rebuild the country after the wars and the turmoil. It's deeper than that. This education fervor is 1,000 years old. To be educated, to pass the exam is the key. That's the key to social status and to wealth and to power. It's the key to everything, is to be educated. So the Sunbi culture is a key to understanding the educational tradition of Korea. The civilian control of the court, with the exception of the Che military for a short while at the beginning of the Koryo period, the Korea has balanced its court between the military. They've kept the military in control. Do you know that of the 250 counties of Korea that were appointed magistrates from the central government, that half of those counties had to have a military governor, just to keep the military in balance with the civilians so that they didn't get out of balance like the battle that led to the Che takeover in the early Koryo period. Well, and then the slavery is nothing but a symbol of stability. And the ultimate evidence, I think, is the surname thing. Do you get it? Do you understand that there were only 250 surnames in traditional Korea? Only 250. How many surnames are there in Japan? How many do you suppose? 250 in Korea, 2,500 in Japan, 25,000 in Japan, 250,000 in Japan, around 300,000 surnames in Japan. For every one Korean surname, there are 1,200 surnames in Japan. You're talking about a radically different approach to family and social order between Korea and Japan. So this idea of few families that maintain these aristocratic traditions is, again, evidence of what I think is a peaceful and stable society. Part two. This is talking about Confucianism. And to understand Confucianism in the 21st century, I think we need to look back at Confucianism in previous centuries. We criticize, especially we young women, the young women of Korea are very critical. I've been really surprised on my YouTube channel when I do something that's sort of positive about Confucianism. I get nailed. People write in and talk, oh, how awful Confucianism. We need to get rid of Confucianism. And Yugo Sasang Temene Urinaraga Manghetta, and this kind of stuff is really critical of Confucianism. But my argument is that you have to understand the difference between Confucianism and Puge Sahwe. Puge Sahwe I translate as patrilineal society. Puge Sahwe means the dominance of the males. And the hallmarks of the patrilineal society is that women lost their inheritance rights that they once had. Women were no longer participating in the ancestral ceremonies like they once had. The genealogies become centered on the male line. The son preference, and you have to get a son by all costs, whatever medicine you take or whatever, and then you adopt. And inter-clan adoption rates were as high as 15% by the time you get to the end of the Chosun period. So you had to have a son, this craziness to have a son. And in marriages, only shijip, no more changa. But in the early Chosun period, you had changa. You had marrying at the wife's house. The anthropologists would call it uxolorical marriage, but uxoloral marriage, isn't it? Matrilocal, uxoralocal marriage. Yeah, that's it. Well, you don't see that in Korea in the last 300 years. And you see the single surname village. These are all hallmarks of Korea, not forever, and not from the beginning of the Chosun dynasty. There's a mistaken idea among many Koreans that Korea became Confucianized and Puge Sahwe at the beginning of the Chosun period. Absolutely untrue. Absolutely untrue by half, because these things did not take place until the late 17th century. So let's look at the pre-Confucian Confucianism, or pre-patrilineal Confucianism. Confucianism before the Puge Sahwe takes over, okay? And here we see a society where women had equal inheritance rights. Daughters participated in hosting the ceremonies in rotation, taking turns with their brothers. Genealogies included female lines as well as male lines, which is a little surprising, but that's what early genealogies looked like. Both downward genealogies, including posterity of daughters as well as posterity of sons, and also going upward, because they would look at both the mother's lines. And in fact, do you know what a kojo harabaji is? You have abaji, harabaji. Jungjo harabaji is great-grandfather. Kojo harabaji is great-great-grandfather, okay? Now, you all be Koreans for a minute, even you Caucasians. How many great-great-grandfathers do you have? How many kojo harabaji do you have? Most Koreans raise their hand and say, 1. But you have a father and a mother. You have 2 grandfathers. You have 4 great-grandfathers. You have 8 kojo harabaji. And in the old days, Koreans had what was called a pal gojo do, a chart of the 8 great-great-grandfathers. And it's exactly the same kind of thing as you would see if you turned it this way. They do it vertically, but if you turned it sideways, you have exactly the same thing as a genealogical chart of the first 6 generations of your family tree. And we call it a family tree, going sideways, like the tree was chopped down. The Korean family tree goes upward. It looks just like a family tree. It branches up, you see. Korea had that kind of a consciousness of family before the Puge Sahwe took over, okay? So daughters were equal to sons in everything but politics. Only men could serve in political office, but women had inheritance of property. They had freedom to use the property however they wanted to. There were adoptions of daughters as well as adoptions of sons. And adoptions from within the lineage was not the rule. It gradually crept in that the adoption had to be of the same surname from within the chokpo. But there was adoption of non-relatives in the early record we've got. Marriages were both shijip and changa. And an example of this that I like to relate is, you know Yulgok Senseng, the famous scholar whose face is on the Ochanwanchari bill. Everyone knows that he was born at Ochukon, the Black Bamboo Pavilion in Gangneung, okay? And a lot of you have been to Gangneung and you've seen the Ochukon. Well, Ochukon was Shin Saimdang's house. That's where he was born in his mother's house. Well, I recently found out it wasn't just her house. She inherited the house from her mother, a Yongin Ishi. And she inherited the house from her mother, a Kangnun Cheshi, who, as near as we can tell, was the woman who built the house. So we have this matrilineality coming down, but it's within a balanced system. Here's another trick question I often ask my Korean audiences. I say, before Puge Sahwe, what did you have? And the response is automatically, Moge Sahwe. Before patrilineality, you have matrilineality. Is that the case? Absolutely not. There are all sorts of other social organizations that are available, including bilateral systems. And in a bilateral system, both sides of the family operate in somewhat equal fashion. Surname comes through the man, but property ownership and other things are bilateral. So the idea of shijip kada, changa kada, you know, when a foreigner first learns Korean, he thinks that shijip kada and changa kada are just the words you say. Men say changa kada, women say shijip kada. And we always have a laugh in Korean class because a man will say, ajik shijip mokasamnida. And a man cannot say ajik shijip mokasamnida because men don't shijip kada. Well, it's more than just the words. It's a social institution. And to shijip kada means to go live at the shijip house, at the husband's father's house. And changa kada is to go to the wife's family's house and to be married and live there. So it was balanced in the early period, and we see this all over the place. There are several prominent villages. If you've been to Hahue, everybody knows Hahue if they know anything about the landscape of Korea. Hahue, the famous village. You go to Hahue, and it's the home of Yu Sung-yong, the famous prime minister during the time of the Imjin War. Well, he married into the family. And from that time forth, it became a Yushi family. And several of the other prominent villages of Korea are marked from when a son-in-law moved in and stayed, and then it became the village. Once these things ossified, once it became solid and immovable in the late 17th century, you have the creation of the single surname village. Before that time, you have mixed surnames in all these villages. So this is a picture of a pre-Puge Sahwe that practiced Confucianism. It was operating there. And therefore, this is the kind of Confucianism that can be used in Korea today. It does not have to be patrilineal. It can be balanced between patrilines and matrilines. Confucianism, I see, as one of the 5 great religions of the world. And Koreans are always quick to say, oh, Confucianism is not a religion. No, it's not like Buddhism. It's not like Christianity. And it's not. But that doesn't mean it's not a religion. I prefer the word belief system. If you talk about belief system, you can have all sorts of things. In Marxism, in their box called belief system, you can't put Christianity in Marxism. You can't put Christianity in that box. You can't put Buddhism in that box. You can't put Confucianism in that box because the belief systems don't tolerate that. But I think the Confucians would be smarter to say, yeah, we're a religion. We teach values. And no, we don't go to church on Sunday. And no, we don't go to the temple and pray to Buddha. But we're a religion, one of the great 5 religions of the world. That's what I think they should do. And it has great teachings. Loyalty, filial piety. What better things to teach children than these concepts of benevolence, justice, etiquette, knowledge, inuiji, inuieji. It just rolls off your tongue. Everybody knows inuieji in Korea. And don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You can throw out patrilineality, but don't throw out Confucianism with it, is my opinion. Part 3, and we'll do this quickly, is the goal to see Shijo adopted into the curriculum of every school in America. Now, does that sound grandiose and out of this world? And, what in the world is this guy talking about? Well, Shijo can follow the path of haiku. Haiku is practiced in every school in America. There is not a child within the last 20 years that has not only studied haiku, has written haiku. Haiku has had total penetration into our culture. And if haiku can do it, why can't Shijo? Okay? So maybe it's not so grandiose after all. Maybe we should try to see Shijo as a symbol of the good culture of Korea, planted within the culture of America, so that they look at Shijo as one example of Korean culture. That's my point of view. So I've given you a template for what I think, and I've written it in this book. This is what the book is about. These are 3 major areas that I have been working on and that I think are important and that I wanted to share with you today. So thank you.
So we do have time for questions, and I hope you have some. So if you raise your hand, and we'll have a microphone over to you in a second. And if you can introduce yourself and your affiliation. So we have a question right here.
Right here in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Hi there, my name is Sean King at a firm called Park Strategies. Thanks for your talk today. I read your Korea Times article on Barbie, and I remember George W. Bush doing haiku. So if Korean history has been misinterpreted, who does that benefit? Who benefits from that misinterpretation today? And if Korea is as peaceful as you say over the millennia, how do we explain the savagery of the Korean War and the inhumanity of the North Korean regime today? It seems like Koreans are nice to others, but not to their own people. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a pretty brutal assessment. I didn't say it today, but I should have. This is all aside from the 20th century. The 20th century has cast a shadow on all of Korean history. The 20th century is a history of victimization. And the Koreans have every right to, it's not nice to say wallow in their self-pity, but that's not a good way to say it, but they have every right to say we've suffered. And we have the obligation of recognizing that they've suffered under the hands of the Japanese, under the hands of international powers that divided them, under the hands of the forces that brought the 2 sides together in the Korean War. And Korea is still divided today. But if you cast the shadow of the 20th century over all of Korean history, I think it's a distortion. I think that beyond the 20th century, you have all these symbols of peace that I've been haranguing about today. Yeah, Koreans can be brutal to each other. And when people talk about the unification of Korea, we can just only hope that it happens in a peaceful way. My good friend Don Clark said, they've shown us that they can be absolutely brutal. And let's hope it doesn't turn that way to a unification when that happens. Yeah, does that answer your questions? Yeah. Anyone else have heartburn? Laurel?
We have two questions here. Yeah, great.
All right. As you know, I'm no historian. What I know about Korean history, I learned from Gary Ledyard, who I think would be very pleased with your discussion of the no invasions. And but I have two on the invasion. Well, you sort of pulled the rug under this one, but when you said never invaded, I immediately thought of Vietnam, which you said, well, 20th century doesn't count. But equivalent, what about providing the ships for the Mongols? I mean, these are both in positions of sort of vassalage to larger powers, but invasion. And then I'm not going to let you get away with Confucian argument. The impression I get is, it isn't like people suddenly woke up one morning in the 17th century and said, let's be patrilineal. What I get from reading Martina Deukler is they had Jushi, they had these idealized models of what kinship is and what ancestors are. And there were a couple of centuries of push to do the right thing. I'm not going to trust Confucianism.
Yeah. I hear you, and of all people in this room, Laurel, you're the one I have to listen to. If you don't know, Laurel's an anthropologist of Korea and Vietnam. My response, you answered with my response about the Mongols and the Vietnam, that they were under the suzerainty of greater powers. So I'm going to give them the excuse for that. It was not their initiative, I'm going to say. But here again, everything that I've said can be tempered with some examples, some exceptions, but I think there's a strain here that works. Now, as for Confucianism, you don't want to cut them any slack. I can appreciate that, and you're speaking as a female and as a feminist too. No, I can appreciate that, but I still think there's virtue in the basic teachings of Confucianism. I think that this late 17th century, you're right, it was pushed before this time. The Neo-Confucian text pushed them, but they didn't do it until the late 17th century. You can find inheritance documents that show that women were receiving equal inheritances right up until the 1770s, 1780s, and even after. So I think the actual practice, they were arguing it beforehand, and they were trying to implement a pure patrilineal. Yeah, they did work hard at it. But I think it didn't happen, is the one thing. They were working at it, but it didn't happen until the late 18th century. And I think there are other forces that came into play at that point. I think population pressure had something to do with that, to change the inheritance pattern rather than dividing everything up to keep an estate together. So I think there were material motivations as well as ideological motivations. But no, I like Confucianism. That's my problem. I like the ideas of these virtues that they teach, So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I'm sympathetic to your feelings on this. Mrs. Laurel, as a female. You have some email questions that came in.
We do, but we have one more question
Dr.
here.
Kim, yes.
Hi. I'm a psychiatrist, and I appreciate your, talk about pointing out the advantage and the good point, qualities of Confucianism, and as well as the Korean history. My question is where the frog is coming from. The analogy of a frog, or the living in all this time, then lived in the well, or go around the well, and now came out of the well and participating in world affairs, in your view. And another question is what this really represents the Korean history and now out of the well in the Korean psyche. And the Confucianism was a sort of non-progressive and very traditionally bound, and now it's out of well, do you think that they will take off and do, you think it should be more westernized, or do you develop like a Shijo and you develop the Korean Jung and the psyche, to spread to the West?
Well, I'm not going to answer a question from a psychologist about psychology. I'm not going to try to out-psychologize or out-psychoanalyze the psychologist. But let me say this: as far as the frog in the well, if you don't know it, this is a play on the old Chinese, Korean, Japanese saying of a frog in the well, and it's a way of saying to someone, "You're not looking at the big picture." The Japanese always add a phrase to it. They say, "What is the perspective of what's the view of the ocean from a frog in the well?" In other words, he can't see the ocean. He doesn't know what's going on. And when I first decided to try this, I thought I'd get a lot of criticism because it's really arrogant on my part to say I'm the frog outside the well, to say I'm looking at all these things and you're not seeing it all. But the response, I've had one or two people say on my YouTube channel, out of thousands of comments, I've had one or two say that you're full of yourself. Most people say, "Oh, it's really clever. I like your idea." And people will write to me and say, "I need to be a frog out of the well," and look at Korea in a broader perspective. So that's all I'm trying to do with that. And with any analogy, you push it too far and it'll fall apart. So I don't want to psychoanalyze it too much. As for your other question about the psychology of Confucianism, I don't know. It's bare bones again. I think that the values taught in Confucianism are they're core to what goes on in Korea. For one thing, the first three sentences of the no say, "What is more pleasurable than to study?" And that describes Korea. They're the studiers. The second sentence says, "What is more enjoyable than to greet a guest who's come from afar?" And as a guest who's come from afar, as a frog outside the well, every time I go to Korea, I get a royal reception because people like a guest who's come from afar. They appreciate you, like in Mencius. You considered it not too far to come 1,000 li to visit me. That's what King Liang Hui Wang said to Mencius at the beginning of that book. And then the third line is to be peaceable when you don't get the recognition you deserve, which is to be humble and self-effacing. Now, if that doesn't describe Korea, those three things, I don't know what does. So I think there's some inherent goodness in Confucianism that I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yeah.
We do have some questions that we got from some of our virtual viewers who sent them in earlier. And one following along with the history theme. And how much, the question is from Jacqueline Mezziani, who asks, how much of Korean history taught from 1850 to 1950 was influenced by religious missionaries? And would it align with what you're I'll add, would it align with what you're saying today?
Yeah, I don't know that the Christian missionaries were innovative about history. I think they sort of followed along the narrative that was there, as I did until about the time I turned 60, and I decided, no, I'm not going along with this stuff anymore. Because when you're studying history and you want to do it Korean style, I considered nothing more important than to be Koreanish about my Korean history. And when I diverged from the Orthodox line, people would bring me back in right away. They'd say, oh, that's not the way we look at it. But when I, several years ago, approximately when I did my Hwangap, I guess, I said, no, I'm not going to go along with this anymore. I'm going to tell it the way I see it. And when I do it as a total package like this, if I do one thing at a time, it'll be shouted down. You don't understand our history. But when I show the whole package, it's really quite convincing to audiences that I talk to. And they nod their head and they say, well, no, I've never looked at it that way. I gave you no new facts. These are all the facts you already know in Korean history. I've just given you a different way of looking at those facts.
So along with that, I think that answers the question somewhat from Michael Reiston, who asked, how has this perspective on Korean history been received in Korea and in academia? You've just recently returned. We know that the book is in its fourth printing. And obviously what you've just stated, anything to add?
I get tremendously positive response, and I don't think I'm in the vanguard of this. I think there are a bunch of younger Korean scholars that are also saying some of these same things. They're saying we don't need to be wallowing in the self-pity of victimization anymore. And I think that's happening. I think there's a trend out there.
It probably ties in then a bit, if I'm reading the question or interpreting the question correctly, from Catherine Mazur from UC Berkeley. And is this outsider point of view gendered? And can you address any issues related to women, which I think you have, but also trans others in Korea?
Yeah, certainly the Confucianization is a gendered issue. That's a hot issue, and as you've seen, Laurel and I are going to disagree about just how to deal with this. Yeah, it's very much gendered. The history part, I don't think is. Do you see a gendered issue in the history thing? But on the yeah, it's all male history. The men pass the exams and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, you can't get away from the gendered issue, but the problematic issue is the Confucianization, how you deal with that. Yeah, that's problematic.
There's some questions. I want to throw this in just because there was a question actually from several people. Where can we get the book? It's not listed on Barnes & Noble or Amazon.
Yeah, I don't know why they haven't put it on Barnes & Noble or on Amazon, but you can get it at Kyobo.
Mm-hmm.
And and Kyobo will mail it overseas. You can pay them, on a $1 credit card. You can get it at Kyobo. And I was looking the other day, and there's a thing called K-Books that has it priced in dollars, right on the. I mean, K-Book apparently serves the international market. Kyobo is more domestic.
Mm-hmm. And it hasn't been translated yet. So it is a book that was intended for a Korean audience. It's
who were the ambassador and the 4-star commander. I interviewed them. The Korean government had come in inauguration, and the American embassy was not about to do it, and they slow walked it and put them off, and it was the last minute. They knew they could just get away with not doing anything, and lo and behold, it showed up in the press. The Korean officials had forged Ronald Reagan's signature on a congratulatory note that they had forged that was printed in the press. So they didn't get what they want from the Americans honestly, so they wrote it up themselves. Yeah. Does that do it? You done? You had enough?
Thank you very much, Dr. Peterson. This was a fun and great and educational experience.